On the 31st of March, 1922, on an isolated farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck, approximately 70 kilometers north of Munich, Germany, 6 people were killed. The victims were Andreas Gruber, age 63, his wife, Cecilia, 72, their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35, and Victoria's children, Cecilia, 7, and Joseph, 2. The 6th victim was the family's new maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44, who had arrived at the farm only hours before her death. All 6 were killed with a mattock, a type of pickaxe. Evidence found at the scene indicated that after the murders, the perpetrator remained on the farm for several days, tending to the livestock, eating meals in the kitchen, and sleeping in the house alongside the bodies of the deceased. The crime has never been solved. The farmstead itself was constructed around 1863. Its name, Hinterkaifeck, was a local colloquialism, not an official place name. The German word hinter means behind, and Kaifeck was the name of a nearby hamlet. The farm was, in effect, the farm behind Kaifeck, situated about a mile north of the small village and bordered on one side by a dense forest. This isolation was a defining feature of the property and of the family who lived there. The nearest major town was Schrobenhausen. In the early 1920s, this region of rural Bavaria was a place of deep tradition, social conservatism, and economic hardship in the wake of the First World War. The head of the household was Andreas Gruber. By all accounts, he was a difficult and domineering man, known in the surrounding villages for his ill temper and reclusive nature. His wife, Cecilia, was devoutly religious but largely lived in her husband's shadow. Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, had been widowed during the Great War when her husband, Karl Gabriel, was reportedly killed in France in 1914. She had returned to her parents' farm with her daughter, Cecilia. In 1920, Victoria gave birth to a son, Joseph. The paternity of the boy was a subject of intense local gossip and legal scrutiny. The Gruber family was an object of public scandal. It was widely rumored, and later documented in court records, that Andreas Gruber was engaged in an incestuous relationship with his daughter, Victoria. Both were convicted of the crime, and Andreas served a year in prison. Many in the village believed that Joseph was the product of this illicit union. Victoria was also known to have had a relationship with a local farmer, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who at times claimed Joseph as his own son and provided some financial support. These complex and troubled relationships further isolated the family from their neighbors. In the 6 months prior to the murders, a series of strange incidents occurred at the farm. The family's previous maid, Crescens Rieger, had quit her position abruptly, claiming the house was haunted. She reported hearing footsteps and disembodied voices coming from the attic and felt a persistent sense of being watched. Andreas Gruber, though a pragmatic and unsentimental man, began to experience unsettling events himself. In March 1922, he found a newspaper from Munich on his property. He had not purchased it, and upon inquiring, discovered that no one in the vicinity subscribed to it. Days later, the situation escalated. A set of house keys vanished and could not be found. Shortly after, Gruber confided in a neighbor that he had discovered a set of tracks in the fresh snow leading from the edge of the forest directly to the farmhouse. There were no corresponding tracks leading away. Later that night, the family was disturbed by the sound of footsteps in the attic. Andreas searched the entire farm, including the barn and the attic, but found no one. Despite these events and offers of help from neighbors, he refused to involve the police, stating that the matter was a private one. The night before the killings, a school friend of 7-year-old Cecilia reported that the girl's mother, Victoria, had run from the farm after a violent argument and was found hours later, alone in the woods. On the afternoon of Friday, the 31st of March, 1922, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at Hinterkaifeck. She was escorted by her sister, who stayed for a short time before departing. This was the last confirmed sighting of any member of the household alive. The precise sequence of events that followed is a reconstruction based on the forensic evidence found 4 days later. The investigation concluded that the murders likely took place in the late evening. It is believed that the perpetrator, who may have been hiding in the hayloft of the barn for some time, began by luring the family members out of the house and into the barn one by one. The motive for this methodology is unknown. Perhaps it was a disturbance with the livestock, or a fabricated call for help. The first victim was likely Andreas Gruber. He was struck with the blunt end of the family's own mattock, a heavy tool used for farming. The blows were directed at his head. His wife, Casilia Gruber, was the next to be killed in the barn, followed by their daughter, Victoria Gabriel. Each was dispatched in the same manner, with powerful blows to the head. 7-year-old Casilia was the last member of the family to be killed in the barn. The evidence suggests her death was not instantaneous. It is believed she survived for several hours after the initial attack, lying in the straw in a state of shock and agony. When her body was discovered, she was found to have torn out tufts of her own hair. With 4 members of the family dead in the barn, the killer then proceeded from the barn into the main farmhouse. The distance was short, a matter of a few yards across the courtyard. The interior of the house was dark, save for whatever light was provided by the moon or a lamp. The dog, a Pomeranian, was inside the house, but it was found unharmed. Inside the living quarters, the perpetrator moved to the maid's bedchamber. Maria Baumgartner, who had been in the family's employ for only a matter of hours, was killed in her bed. The murder weapon was again the mattock, and the injuries were consistent with those of the other victims. Her body was left covered by her bedsheets. The final victim was 2-year-old Joseph. He was asleep in his bassinet in his mother Victoria's bedroom. He was killed with a single, heavy blow to the face. His small body was then covered with one of his mother's dresses. After the 6 murders were complete, the killer did not flee. The bodies in the barn were arranged in a stack and partially covered with hay and an old wooden door. The evidence indicates the individual then took up residence at the farm. For the next 3 days, from Friday night until the following Tuesday, the unknown perpetrator lived at Hinterkaifeck. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney. The cattle and other farm animals were fed and watered. Food was eaten from the kitchen pantry, a loaf of bread was consumed, and meat was sliced from a hanging portion. Someone, presumably the killer, continued the daily routines of the farm, surrounded by the silence of the dead. The family's absence was not immediately noticed. On Saturday, April 1st, 2 coffee salesmen arrived at the farm to take an order. They knocked on the doors and windows but received no reply. After walking the perimeter of the property and noting that the machine house gate was open, they left. Over the next 2 days, young Casilia was absent from school without an excuse, and the family did not attend their customary Sunday worship service at the local church. The mail began to accumulate. On Tuesday, the 4th of April, a local mechanic, Albert Hoffner, arrived to repair an engine. He saw none of the family and heard only the sounds of the farm animals. After waiting for an hour, he completed his repairs and left. Later that afternoon, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who had a past relationship with Victoria, grew concerned and sent his sons to the farm. When they returned having seen no one, Schlittenbauer went to investigate himself, accompanied by 2 other men, Michael Pell and Jakob Sig. They entered the barn first. There, they discovered the 4 bodies stacked beneath the hay. Shortly thereafter, they entered the house and found the bodies of Maria Baumgartner and Joseph. The subsequent police investigation, led by Inspector George Reingruber from the Munich Police Department, was compromised from the start. Before a proper forensic examination could be conducted, neighbors and onlookers had entered the property, moving bodies, disturbing evidence, and even preparing and eating meals in the farm's kitchen. The autopsies, performed by Dr. Johann Baptist Aumiller in the barn, established that a mattock was the murder weapon. The skulls of the victims were removed and sent to Munich for further study by clairvoyants, a testament to the desperation of the investigators. These skulls were later lost during the chaos of the Second World War. The initial theory of robbery was quickly dismissed. A large amount of cash was found untouched inside the house. The motive appeared to be personal. Over the years, police interrogated more than 100 suspects, but no arrests were ever made. 1 year after the murders, in 1923, the entire farmstead was demolished, erasing the physical location of the crime. During the demolition, the murder weapon was found hidden in the attic, along with a penknife in the hay. Several theories have persisted. One theory posits that Lorenz Schlittenbauer was the killer. His behavior upon discovering the bodies was considered strange. He entered the house alone using a key after finding the bodies in the barn and disturbed the crime scene. His motive could have been related to the paternity of Joseph and financial disputes with Victoria. Years later, he made a comment to a local teacher that seemed to display intimate knowledge of the crime scene, mentioning that the killer had tried to bury the bodies but was stopped by the frozen ground. Schlittenbauer maintained his innocence until his death in 1941, successfully suing several people for slander who called him the murderer. Investigators considered Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel, who was thought to have died in the trenches of France. However, his body was never recovered. This led to speculation that he had survived the war, perhaps deserting to Soviet Russia, and returned to discover his wife's infidelity and the existence of a child not his own. After World War II, some German prisoners of war returning from Soviet captivity claimed that a German-speaking Soviet officer had confessed to them that he was the Hinterkaifeck murderer. These claims were inconsistent and could not be verified. A more esoteric explanation suggests the involvement of a transient serial killer. The 2017 book The Man from the Train proposed that the murders fit a pattern of similar crimes committed across the United States between 1898 and 1912 by an unidentified German immigrant named Paul Müller. The similarities included the use of the blunt side of a farm tool, the murder of an entire family in an isolated rural home, the absence of robbery as a motive, and the covering of the victims' bodies. The authors suggest Müller may have returned to his native Germany and continued his killings, with Hinterkaifeck being a possible instance. In 2007, students at the German Police Academy in Fürstenfeldbruck re-examined the cold case using modern criminal profiling techniques. They concluded that due to the passage of time and the loss of evidence, the case could never be definitively solved. However, their final report did state that they had identified a prime suspect, but would not name the individual out of respect for their still living relatives. The files on the Hinterkaifeck murders were officially closed in 1955. A century has passed, and the events at Hinterkaifeck remain encased in ambiguity. The physical evidence is gone, the witnesses are deceased, and the primary suspects have taken any secrets they held to their graves. The core of the mystery is not just the identity of the killer, but the chilling nature of their behavior. Who was the stranger who left the newspaper and the tracks in the snow? Who listened to the family's movements from the attic above? And most unsettlingly, who possessed the composure to murder 6 people and then inhabit their home for 3 days, calmly performing the daily chores of the farm before disappearing as silently as they had arrived, leaving behind only bodies and questions that will likely never be answered?